starting the share of Tisha B'Av. So Kumlena Blat Gemara. We are up to Daf Yud Aleph of an Aleph. We're going to have another version of what Shmuel just said before. So before we said that you're allowed to read in a kila, even though it has a roof, if it's below 10 tefachim. This lashon says, Amni la others say, Lishnachrina Amni la others say, Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel, Mutter Lishin bekilas chasanim besukah. You're permitted to sleep again in this canopy, in this bed for newlyweds. Lefisha ein lagag. Here we're talking about a canopy that's draping down on both sides of this beam that goes across from the toe to the head, and because there's no roof, there's nothing flat there. Here, even if it's 10 tefachim high, it doesn't matter because there's no roof. So the previous case is talking about there was a roof, and therefore we insisted it had to be less than 10 tefachim, that you can sleep in there. And here we're talking about that there is a roof, so then, but a small roof. So then, even if it's high, here we're talking about there's no roof, so even if it's high in 10 tefachim, it doesn't bother us. Says the Gemara, so mutar lishan bekilas chasani besukah. You're permitted to sleep in this newlywed's bed. There's no roof, there's nothing flat there. Even though it is 10 tefachim high, it doesn't concern us. So Meisvei will go through similar questions we learned. Somebody sleeps in this bed in sukkah. You are not yetzer, you're not yetzer at all. Your mitzvah of sukkah. When we say you're not yetzer, forget about the 10 tefachim. There is a roof there, and because there's a roof, therefore you cannot sleep there because you're sleeping not underneath the schach. You're sleeping under the roof of this canopy. Toshma coming here. Naklitin shnayim. Nakliti means you have two posts on both ends of the bed, then you have a board going across. The kinayfis is above 4 posts. Peter's agabi kinayfis sul. If you spread a sheet over the kinayfis, it's possible because you're not sleeping underneath the schach, you're sleeping underneath the canopy. But agabi naklitin shayla, but you're sleeping under this draped down canopy, it's all right. Ubavachli and naklitin gavoyim and amita, so it should be 10 tefachim high. Sounds like me, but if it's above horse, gavoyim and amita, but if it's more than 10 tefachim high, even though it's a a newlywed canopy, a bridal canopy, so it's possible. Alpha pisha ein lagag. And it sounds from here that even though there's no roof, if it's you said before that if it's above 10 tefachim, if there's no roof, it's all right. It seems to me clearly that if it's above 10 tefachim in all circumstances, it's no good. So we answer, Shayin naklitin dikvi. Naklitin is different than what we learned before about a kilas chasanim. Naklitin is a bit more permanent. So what we learned before, kilas chasanim, that's a newlywed bed over there, it's not permanent at all, just for a short time. Therefore, we said if it's even above 10 tefachim, is not an issue. Here we're talking about another kind of a kila, which is not really chasanim, and therefore it's a bit more permanent. If it's a bit more permanent, then let it be like a kanefis that even below 10 tefachim. You shouldn't be able to sleep there because you're sleeping under a canopy. So we say, but it's not as permanent as a kanefis. If you compare it to a kanefis, it's not so permanent, so therefore you can sleep there if it's not 10 tefachim high. But compared to a kila, it's more permanent, so therefore if it's more than 10 tefachim high, this kind of a canopy, you cannot sleep there. You're allowed to sleep in a kila, even though there's a roof, even though it's 10 tefachim high. Now here we're saying a double thing. There's a roof. Both opinions agree that if there's a roof, it cannot be higher than 10 tefachim. If there's a roof, there's a flat part, because then you're sleeping not underneath the schach, you're sleeping underneath this roof. And yet here it comes along, and the Rabbi Baravuna says it's all right. So we have to come on, Rabbi Yehuda, because he's following the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah we learned yesterday, a different Rabbi Yehuda says, Loi osi oil. Since you're sleeping in a sukkah, here's a whole different point. He says, since you are sleeping inside a sukkah, which is much more permanent, and you just have a bed there that you open up at night, you remove during the day. So the bed is considered temporary in contrast to the sukkah. So therefore, a temporary dwelling cannot cancel a permanent dwelling. And in this instance, the sukkah is permanent and the bed is temporary. It's not. We used to have a custom. You Tanaim say you should sleep under a bed, which you said before. I hold you could sleep under a bed because the bed is temporary. You're going to remove it every day. Can you for the elders? Why don't we just say straight out the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? That's what Rabbi Yehuda wants to say, and therefore temporary bed is not a problem. If it was said, I never thought I was only by a bed. You know why? Why he said you can sleep underneath a bed? The purpose of a bed is not to be a cover. The purpose of the bed is that people can sit on top of the bed. So therefore, maybe that's why Yehuda says we can sleep under the bed. It's not like you're sleeping under a cover inside a sukkah because the bed is not of a cover. Avo kila, when it comes to a canopy, the purpose of the canopy is to surround, protect those who are inside the bed and give them some intimacy. The l'toich hasuya, it's meant to be covered, it's meant to act as a cover. A maloi, maybe Rabbi Yehuda agrees that's a problem. Comes to tell you it's not the reason why. Nothing to do with the fact whether the bed is meant to be a cover or not. Time of the Rabbi Yehuda, what's the logic of Rabbi Yehuda? The le'asi oil arai, we don't want an oil arai to come, umevatel oil keva, and cancel out a permanent oil. Loishna mita v'loishna kila. It makes no difference what it is, a bed or a canopy. All that matters is if it's temporary, it doesn't in any way cancel the sukkah. But the Rabbanan disagree. Okay, Mishnah. This is where Rabbeinu Tam gets his din from, the way he learns. The Mishnah says, according to Rabbeinu Tam, Hidle oleh sagef, and you have a sukkah, you have the structure of a sukkah, and you cover it, then you cover the sukkah with vines. There's a dalas or with a gourd family, or there's a kisum, or you use, we had it before already, you had some ivy, and then v'sicha chagaba, you place tzchach on top of that, then psul. It is puzzle. And why is it puzzle? It is puzzle because the first thing you put on the schach, on the walls, were puzzle schach. Because you first put puzzle schach and then you put the kosher, we got a problem. But had it been the other way around, if you first had the kosher schach and then you put all the puzzle schach on it, Rabbeinu Tam says, there's no problem. It's kosher. That's what we're talking before about the plastic. And that's how he learns. The problem is only that you put the geffen, you put this puzzle schach first and then you put the kosher schach. Okay, that's the main time. Others say there's no difference which way you do it. Put the puzzle first or the puzzle second. It's always a problem. Okay, psul is puzzle. But the im hoya sichuch habe mehen, we had this in the testament base. But if you had a lot more schach kosher than non-schach, than puzzle schach, or you should cut it on, or you went ahead and you cut off all these attached, all these the mechuber, all of those attached, you cut them off, then shaded is kosher. Mechuber is puzzle, and therefore now it is kosher. So this is the rule. Now that you mentioned the problem of mechuber, I'll tell you generally what the criteria for schach is. Kosher hu mekabel tumah, anything which is mekabel tumah, a finished garment or something. Ein gidul minah, does not grow from the ground. Ein mesachir, but you cannot use as schach. But the kol davar she'ein mekabel tumah, anything which is not mekabel tumah, the gidul minah, and it grows from the ground, mesachir, you can use it as schach. And we don't mention here about cutting off the mechuber, because we already mentioned it in the first part of the Mishnah that mechuber is an issue as well. And there's a big shaila in the Rishonim. How do you know you cannot use mechuber? How do you actually know that you cannot use mechuber? Why? As long as it grows from the ground, it's not makabel tumah. Who cares if it's still attached to the tree? So Rashi learns, because later on the Gemara, either tomorrow or later today, we learn from a pasuk, when you gather together from your wheat. So the only way you can gather something together is if it's loose, not if it's attached. Others disagree, and they learn that there are other issues why mechuber is no good, because tase v'loy mina asi, which is the principle that it has to be made in a kosher way, and not that it came by itself, or it started out in the puzzle way and then became, or it came by itself. The branches came by itself. You didn't do anything for it. And the Torah says, "Tzukah ta'asilcha." You have to make it, and that's the problem with mechuber. Says the Gemara, Yosef Rabbi Yosef come, he sat there and he said, he said that if you cut off these branches, it is kosher. But Rav says that's not good enough. After you, all you did when you cut it off is you remove the problem. But the issue now is that they automatically become kosher. You didn't put it on there in a kosher state. You put it on there in a puzzle state, and afterwards it became kosher. So it's a problem of ta'aseh v'loy mina asu. In fact, Shulchan Aruch says that when you put the schach on the roof, you should make sure that you don't have anything. Let's say you cover the roof is removed, because if you cover the roof is on, that means when you put all the schach on the sukkah, it was all puzzle. And then when you remove the cover, the schach became kosher by itself. You didn't do anything to make it kosher. So you have to make sure when you put the schach on your sukkah, you do it in a kosher way. Says the Gemara, Rav said that you have to then afterwards pick each one up and put it back down. It's Shmuel who said it. Rabbi Yisrael turned around to him and gave him a look. Did I say Shmuel didn't say it? What's the big deal? Shmuel said it, but so did Rav. No, you misunderstood me. I'm trying to tell you the Shmuel Rav never said it. Why? Because the Rav holds that if you cut off the branches, that's good enough. You don't have to then go ahead and do the next step, lifting each particular piece of chacha, putting it back down, shame, sale for shame. I'll prove it to you. We have a similar thing by tzitzis. Remember, by tzitzis also it says you have to tasa, you have to make it in a kosher way. Yet Rab Amram Chassid, Rab Amram the Chassid, the Rama Tichlata le Pazumidin Shabeis, he would put on tchelis on the clothes of his wife. So from here, so Rab Amram felt like the opinions that say, like the Chamim, that women are chayiv in the midst of tzitzis. We paskin like Rab Shimon that at night you are potter from tzitzis, and therefore women are exempt because it's a time-bound mitzvah. There's the machlekes, the Rambam, and the Rosh. What it means exactly when we say night is potter from tzitzis, and this is from the only exceptions are three. The only exceptions where Shulchan Aruch says we don't know who the halacha is like, and that is that the Rambam and the Rosh argue. What does it mean? Night is potter from tzitzis. Does it mean at night, no matter what clothes you're wearing at night, four-cornered garments are exempt from tzitzis, and by day, no matter what you're wearing, you have to put on tzitzis? Or does it mean day clothes versus night clothes? Day clothes, you're always chayiv with tzitzis by day or by night, and night clothes, you're always potter from tzitzis by day or by night. That's why the Arizal says, and Mogla Ramashmar brings that one should be machmir and try to wear tzitzis at night as well, even when you go to sleep, because you're fulfilling a mitzvah. If the day closed, you're fulfilling a mitzvah of wearing tzitzis. Anyway, what's the point of Rab Amram? Rab Amram is saying that he used to put tzitzis on the clothes of his wife. Tolon, first he took a string, and he went around and doubled it again. So he took one string and he doubled it over. That now you have a potential for 8 strings. All you have to do is cut it through. And he didn't cut the end of the string. So he suddenly had a shayla. What should he do? He has the potential for 8 strings, but he needs to take a scissor and cut through all these double overs. So that those 4 string, those 4 double over becomes 8. Also, Lekamed Rav Chia Barashi. He went for Rav Chia Barashi. Amalei said to him, Hachin Amar Rav. Rav said, all you have to do is mafsik and take a scissor, cut through them, the henkshay, they automatically become kosher. Even though the Torah clearly says, ta'asa, you have to make yourself kosher tzitzis. So you hold that's good enough. Same thing with branches of a tree. You just cut the branches, that's good enough. You're not doing anything else. Alma psikasan zuyasiyasan. Cutting the tzitzis, that's good enough. That's considered an activity. Hachanamik tzitzasan zuyasiyasan. Cutting the branches, that's already a tasa. You fixed it up. However, Shmuel says, we don't say psikos as he says cutting the string not good enough, you got to start all over again. Says, what are you talking about? Didn't Shmuel say let's say you put the string, you took 2 ends of your tzitzis and you put the string through both ends, and now you did all the knots and everything else. Now all you have to do is cut. And then afterwards you cut the strings. Now you have strings hanging separately on each corner, and each corner shade is kosher. My love, he tied it all up. He did all the ksharim, he did all the knots and everything else he's supposed to do with tzitzis. And now the only problem is that the tzitzis are connected, which is not kosher. And then all he did was he cut it. So we see Shmuel also agrees that cutting it is sufficient activity. Said no, he cut it, but he didn't yet make the tzitzis. He didn't yet tie the tzitzis around the corners or anything else. So the rest he did kosher in a kosher way. If that's what he did, he cut the strings, and then afterwards he made the tzitzis properly. So Ma'ila Memra. So what's the rule of the Chiddush? So what the Chiddush is, I would have thought that there had to be 2 separate corners when you're threading it through in the first place. The lekka, it didn't happen because you put the string through both corners at the same time. That doesn't matter. The main thing that matters is when you do the ksharim, the knots and all the chulias, the ropes and all that, how it was done. Maybe I'll ask you a question. It says in a brayse, what happens? Tolan, you hung the strings on. If you hung the strings and you didn't cut the corners, psul is possible. My love, it seems to me, that cutting it is no longer going to help. Rav Shmuel said to him, you got to start all over again. Rav said, all you have to do is cut your tzitzis, and that's good enough. It says clearly from here that it's possible. It sounds like that's it. There's no remedy for it. Possible forever. Cutting is not going to do. But to you to the Rav, a question of Rav, my psuli means it is possible ad sheyafsiku until you cut them. Shmuel says, Shmuel holds it's possible forever. You cannot rectify it. You got to start again. Take it out, start again properly. Levi said the same thing. It's possible forever. It's possible forever. The others say, I'm a master, but what's happened to me? I went to Mashmuel, my teacher Shmuel. He said, he told me that it's possible forever. You cannot remedy it because Tasa, you have to make it in a kosher way, and cutting the string is not considered an activity. But Tasa makes us a question. It says, Tolan, you hung up the tzitzis, and then afterwards you cut them, psulin is possible. So it says clearly that's cutting. It does not help. Question of Rav. Tanya, we learn also by Sukah. Also, it says by Sukah, you should do it lechatchila in a kosher way, and not do it in the puzzle way, and then automatically it becomes kosher later on. The kanon we learn from here, hidle oles a geffen. If you then go ahead and you covered it with vines, vesadelas, vesakisum, we learned la Mishnah, and the gourd family or the ivy, vesichach agaban, that you place chach on top of them, so it's possible. Hey Chidami, what happened to all of this puzzles chach underneath? You just left them, they didn't cut it. My tasa also is the problem of tasa. The problem is that right now they're still attached. Ella, but mishikotza, you cut it. And yet it says it's still a problem. Tani psul is puzzle. Doesn't that demonstrate to us that even though you cut it, cutting it does not do it? You have to be tasa. You have to put it on the sukkah in a kosher way. You cannot put it on the sukkah in a puzzle way, and then just cut off the tree, and that automatically becomes kosher. That's the loy mina osi. Mishmam lamim and osik to the osi also. But you to the Rav Kashan Rav Omlach Rav Hochamais Kin Rav will say, you know what our Mishnah is talking about? The shalfinu shlufe. Our Mishnah is talking about you actually did cut the branches off, but the bark is still a little bit attached. That's how Taisa learns. Or Rashi learns it's just so close to the tree that Maris Ayin, it still seems like it's attached to the tree. So but it's not recognizable that you did anything. So it's not a problem of being attached. It's not a problem of being mechuber because it's not attached anymore. But the problem is that people think it's attached. Okay, nevertheless, the fact is it says clearly here, if you hung the tzitzis up and then you cut it, it's no good. It's a question of Rav. So Rav will say, Rav, kasha, it's a question of Rav, taka problem, kasha. Why don't we say that this whole idea of whether cutting is good enough of activity or you have to do something else afterwards to make it kosher is actually machleket tanaim. So far we see that the concept of tasa lemin also is by tzitzis, because it says in the pasuk tasa, and by sukkah. One other place where we have this concept is by mezuzah. We'll have it in Menachos, Tafil Alpha. By mezuzah also it has to be done in a kosher way. Chsaftum al mezuzahs should be done in a kosher way. You cannot have door frame, put mezuzah on the floor, and then attach the door frames to your door. It has to be tas in a kosher way. Now the Gemara is going to ask, what about lulav? Maybe we're going to compare lulav as well. Tas of a loy mina asa. We'll compare lulav to maybe sukkah or something, as we'll see. Tonight, let us say it's an ayman tonight. What happened here is that the hadas is not supposed to have more berries than leaves. If it has more berries than leaves, you got to remove the berries first. But what happens? You tied it together, and on Yom Tov, you went ahead and you pulled the berries off. You're not supposed to do it. You're not allowed to be fixing up something on Yom Tov, like Shabbos. It's Mesak and Mana, like Makabeh Patish. You're not allowed to complete the job. But you did it anyway. You pulled the berries off. You pulled all the berries off of Hadas. And so the question is, you didn't listen to Chachamim, you did it. So we say that it's possible. You defied the edict of the Chachamim, and therefore you cannot use this Hadas. However, the Chacham say it's kosher. Now, what's going on here? So we thought this is how we're going to understand the machlekes. There's a concept of there's two ways of learning Shat Nigmar. Either we tie the way we do today. We tie our lulav and our hadas and our rubbers together. That's called eged. It's a tying it together. That's how some Rishonim learn the rest of the Gemara, and some Rishonim learn talking about holding it in your hand at the same time versus picking each one up separately. But tying is not important according to anybody. So, but let's learn the way simple like Rashi. Let me talk about tying. So right now we're going to assume that you have to tie all three, the lulav and the hadas and the arava, together. And when you tie them together, it should be tasa. You should do them in a way. We're going to compare lulav to sukkah that you have to put it in there in a kosher way. After you stuck the hadas in, you pulled the berries out later, it became automatically kosher. When you put it in, it wasn't kosher. It wasn't tasa in a manner of kosher. You did it in a pasla way. So this is how we're going to learn the argument. So Vrua, we thought kuliyama, everyone holds lulav tzarech eged. You have to tie lulav with a hadas narava, like we do today. And the alfin lulav sukkah will compare a lulav to a sukkah because they both have to do a sukkahs. That why, therefore, you have to do it in a kosher way. Tasa v'loim and asim. T'chsiv gabe sukkah tasa v'loim and asim. So what's the argument? The argument is, how do we define tasa v'loim? What does tasa mean? The man, the machshir, one holds they could just pull the berries off. Would hold that just cutting the branches is also good enough, like Rav. So just cutting the branches off, that's considered tasa, you fixed it up. The same thing with the berries, after it's sitting inside the lulav and the knot, you just pull the berries off, it's automatic, it's not automatic anymore, it's like this tasa. The gabel lulav nami, picking the berries is like you did it kosher way. Uman the apostle, but the one who says apostle, somebody holds, by sukkah, cutting the branches is not good enough. You have to lift each branch separately and put it back down. The gabel lulav nami says, hey, about lulav. We don't say likitosan, just collecting them is good enough. And that's it. The kuliyama, everyone agrees. We do not say gabi sukkah, we do not say basukah. I can argue that there's no machlekes tanaim whatsoever. That Shmuel, the halach is like Shmuel, and that is that you have to physically pick up each lulav, each schach. So what's the argument here by lulav? The argument is as follows. No one says that cutting it is good enough. The question is whether b'chlal you learn lulav from sukkah. B'meilev lulav m'sukkah. No way does the Torah say by lulav you have to make it, the word tasa, in a kosher way. It's good enough if it became kosher later or not. Man the machshir, the one that says it's good enough, you just pull the berries off. Savalei you don't say learn lulav m'sukkah. Man the pasal, the one that pasal Sava learns, yeah, you do lulav m'sukkah. That's one version, but everyone agrees that cutting branches is not good enough. Or if you hold the lulav tzarech, if everybody holds that lulav has to be tied up, you have to do lulav m'sukkah, and it has to be done in a kosher way, and cutting the berries is no good. So what's the argument here? That's good for the argument. You have to tie them together, so therefore the tying is the act of the mitzvah, tying them together. And if you put it in there with the berries in, that means you put it in a non-kosher way. And then when you pick the berries afterwards, it's only minha also. It became automatically kosher. That's no good. There's no such mitzvah that you have to tie them together, and therefore there's no tasa here. So who cares when you pull the berries off? Or we plucked it down tonight. In fact, there's an argument whether you have to tie them or not. Whether you tie it or not, it's kosher. And if you tie agud kosher, you have to tie them together. This way, I told you others learn. Everyone agrees that you don't have to tie them, but you have to hold them in your hand at the same time, not pick up one after another. My time with Rabbi Yehuda, what's the logic of Rabbi Yehuda? Why do you have to tie them together? Yal, if you learn that, lekicha. It says over here lekicha, and lekicha ma'agudas ezek. When it comes to gather together the hyssop and everything else, and by Korban Pesach it says that you have to gather them together, and over there you have to put them together. And here it says also lekach lechem, the four species. So therefore, do we learn the gzera shavanat? Ksiv hasa lekach ma'agudas ezek. Ksiv hasa over here it says. By the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, they had to put it together, do it together, tie them together. Here also you have to tie them together. So if you hold, you have to tie them together. So therefore, there's a mitzvah of putting in all the 3 minim together, tied up. And therefore, if you had berries when you put them in and only picked it afterwards, the Rabban hold the kicha, they don't hold the gzera shava, and therefore there's no mitzvah of putting them together. Doesn't matter when it had berries when you tied them. Come on, then who would follow the time? But I said, you should tie them, but if you didn't tie them, it's kosher. Who makes this distinction with chatchila b'di'evet? We know that if something is mahat Torah, there's no difference with chatchila b'di'evet. The Torah says that you have to do something, you got to do it, except by kachim. And if it's the Rabbanan, then we make a difference. So who said that it's a mitzvah to tie them, but if you didn't tie them, it's all right? If you didn't tie them, what means kosher? The Torah says you have to tie them, you have to tie them. And eat abundant, my mitzvah. What mitzvah is there? You don't have to time at all. Says Rabbanan, he is abundant. It says Ze Kalib and Veyu. this is my God, I should beautify him. He's no the fun of the mitzvahs. He should make the mitzvahs as beautiful as possible. If you remember in Yuma that the people used to bring the Sefer Torah to show, have the most beautiful Sefer Torah because they used to show off their hidden mitzvahs. Big argument whether hidden mitzvah is a mitzvah in the Torah or whether it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We're actually going to have an argument Rashi takes at the beginning of the third parak, and also whether hidden mitzvah is a separate mitzvah or hidden mitzvah is within every mitzvah. Whatever mitzvah you're doing, there's a hidden in that mitzvah itself. It's just an extension of that mitzvah. A few more lines. Anything which is mekabel tumah, anything which is mekabel tumah is no good. Right? We had the criteria. If it's a full garment, something mekabel tumah, and it has to grow from the ground, also it shouldn't be attached. So how do you know all this? There's a pasuk. It says in pasuk that the cloud comes from the ground, that the vapors of the oceans go up and they form the clouds, and therefore it's as if because the pasuk uses the expression yalamina aretz, the clouds come from the ground. It's as if it's considered gedule karka. It's as if it grows from the ground. And we know that the sukkah, we're sitting in the sukkah, according to Rabbi Lezer, because the clouds covered us. So therefore, because we're remembering the clouds, and the pasuk says the clouds come from the ground, so we know it has to be gedule karka. And it's not mekabel tumah, just like clouds are not mekabel tumah. Clouds are not mekabel tumah, the vapor that grows from the ground. Sukkah davar mekabel tumah, grows from the ground. Says the Gemara. This makes sense because the one says that the clouds and sukkah are intertwined. And then they covered her, you were trying to remember the clouds. The one who says that the reason why we sit in sukkahs is to remember the fact that we're able to sit in huts. So what? How are you going to know this din that the schach has to grow from the ground and it should not be kabel tumah? The time you learned, said the pasuk kiba sukkahs shaftis bnei Yisrael. I placed the yidden in sukkahs, and then they covered her. Rabbi Lezer says, Hashem says, I place you in the sukkahs. It must be a cloud, because the huts the Eden built themselves. However, Kiva says sukkahs mamish osulahem. No, that he said that the Eden built sukkahs for themselves to protect them from the sun, the scorching heat while they were there in traveling in the midbar. It's hard to says the clouds fine. According to Rabbi Kiva, when it says in the pasuk that we're remembering the sukkahs that we built, what actually are we remembering? What are we trying to remember? So the Taz says in Shulchan Aruch, what we're remembering is Yetzias Mitzrayim. That after we left Mitzrayim, we were all able to build our own little huts and live in our own little homes. And in Mitzrayim, we had no control over anything. So what we're remembering is actually Yetzias Mitzrayim. And Rabbi says, no, what we're remembering is separate from that is once we left Mitzrayim, we had the Nani HaKavod. When Rabbi came along, so he came along and answered. According to Rabbi Kiva, knew how do you know? He says the pasuk Chag Hasukas Taslachol. It says the pasuk that Chag Hasukas Taslachol Chag the Yom Tov Makish Sukkah L'Chagiga. We had it before already that we compared to Karma Chagiga. We said that the wood in the sukkah itself is holy, like the Karma Chagiga. He said we compared to Chagiga. Ma Chagiga Dover She'enim Makabel Tumah. An animal while it's alive cannot become tummy. The Gedule Min Haaretz, and it grows from the ground. It grows from food that it grows from the ground. So Av Sukkah, also Sukkah, Dover She'enim Makabel Tumah is something that is not Makabel Tumah. The Gedule Min Haaretz grows from the ground. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? The Bebeis on an elephant top. Ima Chagiga, you know what? Chagiga Balei Chayim. Chagiga are living animals. So Av Sukkah Nami Balei Chayim. Are you going to tell me a Sukkah also has to be living animals? And no such thing. So we're going to see in the Gemara tomorrow already. How do we finally learn that tomorrow's a short blot, so we'll leave it for tomorrow already. How do we finally learn that Sukkah is made out of this material that Gedulim and Aretz, and it's not Mekabel Tumah? Okay, everyone have a